So I want to use my precious time on this holiest day of the year to talk to you about Israel. We've just marked the collective Jewish trauma of October 7th, just a couple days ago. But I want to step back a little from the headlines of the Israel-Hamas war as well as the war with Hezbollah to take a larger view. But first I want to tell you a little bit about my own relationship with Israel, because I think it's important for you to know about me as your rabbi, and it profoundly informs what I'm saying today. Some of you know some of this and some of you don't, so I want us all to be on the same page. So I lived in Israel for 2 large stretches of time. The first was in Jerusalem from January to May of 2003. And then the second stretch was also in Jerusalem when Rabbi Dari and I lived there for almost 2 years from 2004 to 2006. She was studying in rabbinical school. We got engaged in Israel. We had our Tanayim ceremony, which is the traditional Jewish engagement ceremony. It was in a packed friend's apartment in the Baca neighborhood in Jerusalem. We got married in the US in the summer of 2005, and then we went back and actually spent our first year of marriage together in our apartment, living in Jerusalem. I spent a lot of time doing Hebrew Ulpan and studying in yeshiva, but I was also deeply involved in Israeli-Palestinian peace work. I spent several weeks living in the West Bank with Palestinians and international peace activists. I saw a lot of intense and disturbing things. For example, I witnessed Israeli bulldozers demolish Palestinian homes twice before my eyes, 2 separate occasions, and saw the families sitting outside of their destroyed home weeping, sitting next to the few possessions that they could save.
42 people.
I lived with the Christian Peacemaker team inside the Palestinian old city of Hebron for 2 weeks, and I had several Arabic lessons with a woman who had actually been inside the tomb of the patriarchs and matriarchs when Baruch Goldstein massacred 29 Muslims at prayer. She told me about that experience. One of my proudest accomplishments was that I was one of the leaders of the first several trips of what became known as Encounter, which is an organization that's grown enormously. And we were taking future and current Jewish leaders to meet directly with Palestinians in the West Bank. One of the things I came to deeply believe 20 years ago, and I still deeply believe now, is that one of the most important things I can do as an American Jewish leader is to amplify courageous and visionary Israeli voices who believe in a shared future between Israelis and Palestinians, one that's based on justice, equality, and freedom from domination. Because after all, these Israelis are the ones who are really living there and dealing with the intensity of life. The book of Proverbs says that when there's no vision, the people become unruly. Having some kind of vision is essential to overcoming the stuckness and the depressed paralysis that so many of us feel when we hear the continued news of unending violence between Israelis and Palestinians. There's so much negativity in the discourse around Israel and Palestine within Jewish communities, within families, within campuses. We so desperately need to be exposed to some kind of vision that's hopeful. Hope is really a mitzvah in this context. So I want to bring you primarily this morning the words of 2 badass Israeli women peace activists, each working in different ways. Really, I just wanted to be able to say badass in a high holiday sermon. But no, they really are. So the first woman is Rabbi Chaviva Ner David. In 2006, she became the first woman to publicly receive Orthodox rabbinic ordination, although she eventually left Orthodoxy and now calls herself a post-denominational rabbi. She's now 55. She's a writer and the founding rabbi of Shemaya, a mikvah for body, mind, and soul on Kibbutz Hanaton in the Lower Galilee, where she lives. She may be familiar to some of you since she's written numerous times in the last year in particular for Evolve, the groundbreaking Jewish Conversations, which is the online Jewish magazine created by Reconstructing Judaism. Quick show of hands, how many of you have heard about or have read articles from Evolve, have gone on to the website? A few people. Not enough, okay? Not enough. This is one of the most fantastic resources that the Reconstructionist movement has created in the last 5-6 years. It's a shining example of what contemporary Reconstructionism is. They have articles on multiple topics, anti-Semitism, other kinds of spiritual things, but they have a really excellent section on Israel and Palestine, a wide array of thoughtful perspectives. Rabbi Chaviva's words that I'm sharing you actually come from an article that she just wrote reflecting on the yahrzeit of October 7th. So she writes, I moved to Israel in my 20s. I grew up in a religious Zionist home with much family in Israel. I arrived with love for this place, but also with eyes wide open. I knew there was work to be done, and I was an activist from the start. I hit the ground running. At first, my activism was more focused on religious pluralism, and I'm still involved in that work. But when I moved to the Galilee, made many more Palestinian-Israeli friends, and realized the extent to which the Zionist narrative I had been taught is only part of the story, then the focus of my activism and much of my writing became healing our painful past and building a joint peaceful future. If that issue is not solved, I see no future for this country. More recently, I became especially involved in standing together. In Hebrew, it's Omdim B'Yachad, a grassroots activist movement based on equal partnership among Palestinian and Jewish Israelis. I had a clear redemptive vision of how we were meant to live together in peace, and I believed we were on the path towards it. I knew it was a long road ahead, but I believed we were moving in the right direction. Then October 7th happened. My vision was not shattered, and my relationships with my Palestinian Israeli friends remain intact. In fact, our local Standing Together chapter has doubled in size since then. I understand it's now around 600 people, and our work has only intensified. And so I believe that this major crisis would be the shattering that would lead to resolution, that Palestinians and Israelis would realize that the status quo is not sustainable and the all or nothing aspirations on both sides are not attainable. But from where I sit now, it seems the opposite has occurred. The leadership on both sides seems determined to use this historical moment to either destroy the other or destroy us all, rather than find a way for us all to live together in peace. This does not mean that we who believe in a different vision are giving up. It means the road ahead is longer than we had expected and the stakes are higher. Personally, she continues, for me, this year has meant having to make my political activism even more of a top priority than it already was. It has meant putting aside other projects, interests, responsibilities in reaction to the urgency of the moment. After the elections, but before the war, I was already demonstrating against this government every Saturday night. In addition to my peace work and Palestinian-Jewish partnership building activism, now, since the war began, I am out protesting a few times a week, even canceling or missing other meetings to do so. and my partnership building and peace work continues, even though to some, peace seems far off, if not impossible. The Mishnah and Pirkei Avot has helped keep me focused on the work instead. It is not up to you to complete the work, but you are also not free to stop doing it. This has also been a confusing year, upsetting my feelings of belonging with the progressive left. The speed and ease with which so many on the left jumped to praise Hamas and condemn Israel on October 7th were stunning and eye-opening. My activism on this issue has consistently maintained that both the Zionist narrative and the Palestinian nationalist narrative are each only part of the story. Favoring one over the other or accepting one but not the other will only perpetuate the cycle of violence. It's been challenging to keep my center. When in more right-wing or even centrist Jewish circles, I've played the role of reminding people of Palestinian humanity, while in left-wing circles, even Jewish, I have had to remind people of Jewish humanity. The demonizing on both sides is unsettling, but it has reminded me of where I stand, of my special ability to understand both sides and see the bigger picture. It has not been easy to maintain that position, but it is my truth. My ability to sympathize with both sides is my superpower. Living in Israel has at least put me in a position where I can criticize and demonstrate against my government without feeling I'm feeding anti-Jewish tropes and encouraging Jew hatred. I'm grateful for that. But if this extremist government is not ousted in the next elections, the future looks grim here. So those are her words. So I wish I had more time to tell you about Standing Together, the amazing progressive grassroots movement mobilizing Israeli, Jewish and Palestinian citizens of Israel that Rabbi Chaviva works with. They do have a super inspiring 3-minute video about doing their work in the current context of the war. That's, you just Google Standing Together Israel, you'll find it, or it's a link to it in my sermon. It's a video everyone on the planet, if you're human, you should see this video. The second Israeli I want to tell you about is a woman named May Pundak. May is 39 years old. She's a human rights lawyer by training, a feminist activist, and is now the Israeli co-director of an organization called A Land for All, 2 States, 1 Homeland. She lives with her family in Jerusalem. A powerful and poignant part of her background is that when May was 9 years old, she knew that her father was often away, and she knew that he was on some kind of mission for Israel. She didn't know what he was doing, but she knew that it was so secret. Even as a 9-year-old, she couldn't tell her friends about it at school. So her father, Ron Pundak, was in Norway conducting back-channel talks with Palestinians that resulted in the '93 Oslo Accords, which became the foundation for the 2-state solution that has long anchored the peace process. Sadly, her father died in 2014 from cancer at the too young age of only 55. And May basically really continues his work in her own way. So I haven't had a chance to personally meet with Rabbi Chaviva, but Rabbi Dari and I we had a lengthy Zoom call with May last April when Daria was preparing for several meetings with US congressmen, senators, and White House representatives as part of an interfaith delegation advocating for a permanent ceasefire in Gaza. We were quite frankly blown away by May's insight and her hopeful vision. It's become fairly common now to speak of the 2-state solution as dead or as no longer viable, because it was based on creating a viable Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza, separating the two populations. What's primarily killed the practicality of the traditional two-state solution is that settlements have become so extensive, with more than 700,000 Israeli Jewish settlers carving up East Jerusalem and the West Bank, making separation impossible. Now, what is practical about the vision of May's organization, A Land for All, Two States, One Homeland, is that it's not based on a separation paradigm, because it recognizes that Israelis and Palestinians are irrevocably intertwined, each clinging to a vision of a homeland on land claimed by both. The answer, A Land for All says, is neither a single state nor a simple division into two. Instead, it would be two states confederated in a shared homeland. May's model is the European Union, which, as she noted, was composed of countries like France and Germany, which had been at war with each other regularly not so long before the bloc began to come together. 80 years ago, would you have expected German hipsters to live in France, she said? But they do. To make such a confederation work, both sides would have to accept conditions like the free movement of Israelis and Palestinians, the settlement of refugee claims, the authority of common institutions to handle issues like human rights, natural resources, economic cooperations. Palestinians living in Israel would vote in Palestinian elections. Israelis living in a future Palestine would vote in Israel. Jerusalem would be a shared capital, its holy sites managed by an international authority that included religious representatives. Most of the West Bank settlers could remain where they are as Israeli citizens and Palestine residents. This vision has been co-created by Israelis and Palestinians. There's also a Palestinian co-director of this organization over a period of 12 years. We will be having 2 Israeli leaders from A Land for All speak to us here at OSE by Zoom in just over a week from tomorrow, on October 20th. One of them, Avi Dabush, is a survivor of the Hamas October 7th attack on Kibbutz Nirim and is the executive director of Rabbis for Human Rights. I wish I had more time to talk more about this vision of the 2 states, 1 homeland, how that would work, but they also have great information and more details on their website. One of the things I have found most powerful about the vision that May and A Land for All have is that it's based on justice and equality and not on domination. Because, and I know this is hard for some of us to hear, but I really understand that Israel's approach to the now almost 3 million Palestinians living in the West Bank has been one of control and domination for over 57 years. It's vital that we as Reconstructionist Jews understand this. I used to speak of Israel's occupation of the West Bank, but occupation is supposed to be, by international law and common sense, a transitory state of affairs. But what we have now is more like de facto annexation, except that those who have been de facto annexed don't have voting rights. So in 1993, when Oslo was first signed, approximately 260,000 Israeli settlers were living beyond the Green Line, the 1967 boundaries. Now, as I said, that number has grown to over 700,000. Israel has filled the West Bank with settlements, along with highways, infrastructure, banks, factories, businesses, even a large university. The Jewish settlers who live in the West Bank vote there for the Israeli parliament, and they're subject to the laws that the Israeli parliament legislates, as enforced by Israeli police and judged in Israeli courts. The settlement sewer systems, communication, road networks, electrical grids, water for infrastructure are all integrated into pre-67 Israel. The millions of Palestinians who live in the West Bank live under a completely different legal system of Israeli military rule. Under this legal system, for example, Palestinians can be detained indefinitely without charge or trial. In the words of Amnesty International Secretary General Agnes Callamard, every aspect of Palestinians' daily lives is disrupted and controlled by Israeli authorities who place restrictions on their rights to move about, earn a living, pursue educational and professional aspirations, enjoy a decent quality of life, as well as depriving them of access to their land and natural resources. And then there is the intense levels of settler violence that Palestinians are subjected to, much of which goes unpunished. These attacks have skyrocketed since October 7th. The UN has documented over 1,400 attacks by settlers on Palestinians in the West Bank in the past year. And that doesn't include harassment or threats. That's physical attacks, sometimes on women teachers, children. Some of the most far-right Israeli settlers who deeply believe in Jewish domination, some of whom openly advocate expulsion of Palestinians, hold ministerial roles in the current Israeli government. In recent years, many of us in the US, particularly those of us who are white, have learned about systemic racism and how it works. The way Israel has controlled the West Bank for over 57 years is cut from that same cloth. It is a separate and unequal, intensely discriminatory system of domination, and it's no wonder that people all over the world protest it. May says that her father understood that our liberation, that Israeli liberation, depends on the liberation of the Palestinian people. My dad, she says, was committed to the safety and continuation of the state of Israel, but he was committed to equality and justice. And he taught me that you can't separate the two. She continues, the mentality of separation leads us to think that we can solve the problem by putting the Palestinians behind a wire. It starts with fear, which I completely understand, but it ends in racism. The vision of a land for all, 2 states, 1 homeland is one way. There are multiple ways, but it's one way out of this terrible system of oppression, violence, and fear. While I'm so inspired by the vision of these incredible and brave Israelis and their dedication, I'll also admit to you that on bad days, the situation looks really bleak to me, and I feel like it reminds me of the resistance in Star Wars, that there's, that folks like May and Rabbi Chaviva and others are just being overwhelmed by these kind of powerful Darth Vader-led far-right forces whose vision seems to be nothing other than Jewish domination. But Reb Nachman famously says, Asur lahityaesh, it's forbidden to despair. And to close, I'm going to bring words from one more inspiring Israeli who is really living this idea of not despairing. His name is Maoz Inan. He's an Israeli entrepreneur and peacemaker. His parents and childhood friends from Netiv HaAsara were killed by Hamas on October 7th. Maoz describes that he used to say that nothing can prepare you to respond to the trauma of October 7th. But he came to understand that his entire life was preparation to face his parents' death, led particularly by their example. During the Shiva for their parents, Maoz had a vision. He saw all of humanity wounded from the war, and the tears of his family washing the blood-soaked ground to reveal a path to peace. May this be a year that a critical mass of Israelis and Palestinians choose life over endless violence, and may we all find ways to support them. Gamar Chatima Tova, may we all be sealed in the book of life.